Chapter 1. The Ring That Fed. A winter. The first snow of December came quietly that year, floating like white ash over the rooftops of Eldenmere, a forgotten village crouched beneath the shadow of the royal capital. It was the kind of winter that gnawed at bones and pride alike. And for the poor, it meant only one thing: hunger. Inside a crooked cottage at the edge of the frozen woods, Clara Vale stirred the last of their soup, if one could call it that. It was little more than thin broth, made from turnip water and the memory of carrots. Her mother, Margaret, sat by the hearth, her frail hands cupped around the bowl, as if holding it tighter could warm her from within. The fire was dying, and so was hope. "Eat, Mama," Clara urged softly. "You've not had a full meal in 2 days." Margaret smiled, but her lips trembled. "I've eaten more winters than you've seen, child. You take it. You'll need your strength for work." Clara swallowed hard. "There is no work." Her voice cracked. "No one wants a seamstress when they can't even afford cloth." Silence fell, heavy, despairing silence that only the poor know, the kind that stretches between two people who love each other yet can do nothing to save one another. At last, Margaret rose, swaying slightly, and went to the small wooden chest that sat beneath the window. Clara knew what was inside before her mother even opened it. Wrapped in a piece of faded silk lay the last remnant of their former life, a sapphire ring. Its deep blue stone caught the firelight like a drop of frozen sea. Clara's breath caught. "No, Mama." Her mother didn't look at her. "It's time. That ring was grandfather's. You told me it belonged to the Vale family before the Vales had to sell everything just to survive," Margaret said gently. "Before your father died, before I learned that pride doesn't fill an empty stomach." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Please, we'll find another way." Margaret turned toward her daughter then, her eyes full of both love and sorrow. "Child, there is no other way. The baker's children are starving too. The butcher's wife has sold her pots. We will not live through this winter unless we trade something of worth." She lifted the ring, the metal cold against her trembling fingers. "This will buy bread enough for a week, perhaps 2. Clara stared at the sapphire, remembering how it used to rest on her mother's hand when her father was alive, when laughter filled this house, when there were guests and music and light. That ring had once been a promise of love, of security. Now it would be their salvation or their final surrender. Margaret wrapped herself in her shawl and pressed the ring into her daughter's palm. "Go to the village." "I haven't the strength." Clara shook her head. "No, I can't." "You must," her mother whispered. "You're stronger than I am now." Outside, the wind howled like a hungry beast. Clara slipped the ring into her pocket and pulled her threadbare cloak tight. She stepped out into the snow, each footfall a muffled prayer. The streets of Eldenmere were nearly empty. A few desperate souls trudged through the drifts, faces hidden, eyes hollow. The market square looked abandoned, save for a handful of merchants huddled beside their carts. Clara approached the baker first. His face fell when he saw her. "Miss Vale," he said kindly but with pity, "I've no work for you. My wife's been patching the aprons herself." "I didn't come for work," Clara said quietly. "I came to trade." He frowned. "Trade what?" From her pocket she drew the ring. Even dulled by soot and time, the sapphire gleamed like a secret flame. The baker's eyes widened. "That's worth more than bread." Clara forced a weak smile. "Not to us." He hesitated. "You could fetch coin for that in the capital." from nobles, collectors. "I need bread," she said firmly. "Now." After a long pause, he nodded. "Wait here." He returned with a small sack. Loaves still warm, their scent almost dizzying after so many weeks of thin soup and silence. He weighed them in his hands, reluctant to take the ring, but Clara pressed it into his palm before she could lose her nerve. "Please," she whispered, "before I change my mind." He sighed deeply. "I'll keep it safe. If you ever come back with coin, you may buy it again." She nodded, though she knew she never would. When she returned home, her mother was asleep by the fire, a faint smile on her face, as if she dreamed of summer. Clara laid the bread on the table and brushed snow from her cloak. For the first time in weeks, the cottage smelled of warmth and life. But as she looked at her mother, something in Clara's chest ached. That ring had been their last tie to the past, to who they once were. Now it was gone, and she felt somehow that she'd traded more than gold and stone. She'd traded a piece of their story. The following weeks passed in a blur of snow and survival. Her mother grew weaker despite the bread. By late February, the cough came, deep, ragged, and unstoppable. No medicine, no priest, no prayers could drive it away. When spring came, Margaret Vale was gone. The funeral was small. Clara wore her mother's shawl, her hands trembling as she placed wild flowers upon the grave. She had no ring, no family, no means of support. Only a name that meant nothing in a kingdom that had long forgotten her kind. But she had one thing left, her hands. They could sew, stitch, and shape beauty from scraps. She sold the cottage to pay debts and took a room in the capital, working long days in a seamstress shop near the palace walls. She spoke little, smiled rarely, and worked until her fingers bled. Yet in her quiet heart, she carried the memory of that sapphire, the way it had caught fire in the light, the way her mother's hand had looked when she wore it. Sometimes she wondered where it was now, perhaps in some merchant's pocket, perhaps adorning a noblewoman's finger, or perhaps forgotten, like the girl who once needed it to live. One evening, as Clara was finishing the hem of a lady's gown, the shop door opened. A man entered, tall, cloaked against the rain. His boots gleamed with wealth, but his manner was quiet, almost courteous. He spoke briefly with the mistress of the shop, who immediately curtsied. "His Highness requires urgent assistance," the mistress said after he departed. "The royal tailor is ill, and the palace needs extra seamstresses for the spring ball." Clara froze. "The palace? Yes, you'll go, Clara. You have the finest handwork among us." Her heart pounded. "Me? But no arguments. Be there by sunrise." That night, sleep did not come. Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the rain whispering against the window pane. She thought of her mother, of the ring, of all that had been lost and buried beneath the weight of necessity. By dawn, she dressed in her plainest gown, tied her hair back neatly, and joined the carriage that would take her through the palace gates toward a world she had once belonged to only in dreams. And somewhere deep in that golden fortress, waiting unseen in the folds of fate, was a sapphire ring, soon to return to the one whose family had given it up for bread. Chapter 2. A chance in the royal halls. The palace of Alderhall rose from the valley like a crown of marble and frost. Its spires pierced the dawn mist, its windows glowed with the gold of early sun, and its flags snapped sharply in the wind, symbols of power, beauty, and distance. For Clara Vale, who had grown up seeing only its silhouette from miles away, the sight stole her breath. The carriage stopped before the servants' gate, where a steward waited with a clipboard and a frown. "Name?" he asked briskly. "Clara Vale," she said, trying to sound steady. He checked his list and nodded. "You're assigned to the royal ballroom preparations. Report to Mistress Danver." She followed the line of women through the narrow corridors of the palace's lower quarters, the humming world behind the velvet curtains. The air smelled of soap, wax, and the faint perfume of roses drifting from the gardens beyond the high glass windows. Everywhere she looked, there was movement, pages running errands, cooks shouting orders, maids polishing banisters until they shone like silver. The palace was alive, a heart beating beneath silk and marble. At last they entered the ballroom. Clara stopped short. The room seemed larger than life itself. Chandeliers blazing with 1,000 candles, golden pillars carved with vines and cherubs, floors of pale stone that caught and mirrored every glimmer of light. It was a cathedral of beauty, made not for prayer but for spectacle. Mistress Danver, the head seamstress, was already shouting commands. "You stitch the drapery, you check the lace trim, and you—" Her sharp eyes landed on Clara. "See to the blue silks. The royal family will inspect them before noon." "Yes, ma'am," Clara murmured, setting to work. She unrolled bolts of sapphire blue fabric, their sheen rich and deep, almost the same color as her mother's ring. For a moment she froze, fingertips trembling over the cloth. That same shade, that same impossible blue. "Keep moving," barked Mistress Danver. Clara nodded quickly and began stitching, but her mind drifted elsewhere, to the memory of firelight gleaming on a sapphire that once meant everything. By midday, whispers filled the air. The royal family had returned from their winter estate and were to inspect the preparations personally. The seamstresses stood straighter, the servants bowed lower, and the air itself seemed to tighten with anticipation. Then the doors opened, and he entered. At first, Clara did not know who he was. He wore no crown, only a dark blue coat trimmed with silver, and a simple sword at his side. His hair, chestnut brown, caught the sunlight as he walked, and his expression was neither haughty nor cold, just thoughtful, as if his mind lived elsewhere. But when the steward murmured, "His Highness, Prince Adrian of Alderhall," the entire room bowed. Clara's heart stumbled. Prince Adrian, the heir to the throne, the man whose future was already inked in alliances and expectations, a life of duty, not choice. He moved among the workers, offering polite words, asking questions with genuine interest. His voice was warm, his eyes, those eyes. When he turned toward her, she forgot to breathe. They were grey, not icy but clear, like clouds before rain. And when his gaze met hers, something strange flickered in them. Recognition, curiosity, she could not tell. "You're the seamstress working on the blue silks?" he asked. "Yes, Your Highness," she said quickly, bowing her head. "Blue suits this room," he said almost to himself. "It reminds me of something, though I can't think what." She dared to glance up. "Perhaps the sea, Your Highness?" A small smile touched his lips. "Perhaps." He studied her face for a moment longer, long enough that she felt her pulse quicken. Then, moved on to speak with Mistress Danver. Clara exhaled shakily, staring down at the fabric to hide her confusion. Why had he looked at her that way, as if searching for something he had lost? That evening, when the day's work ended, the seamstresses gathered in the servant hall for supper. The air was thick with gossip. "Did you see how he spoke to Lady Ashton?" One girl sighed dreamily. "He'll marry her, you know. They say the king has already chosen her." Another scoffed. "He's too kind for her. She looks down on everyone." "Kind?" A third snorted. "A prince doesn't have time for kindness." Clara stayed quiet, staring into her stew. She'd met many kinds of men in her life, merchants, farmers, nobles who barely saw her, but none had looked at her the way the prince did. And yet she reminded herself sharply, "You are no one, a seamstress, a girl who once traded her mother's ring for bread. You have no place in his story." Still, as she returned to her small cot that night, she couldn't shake the image of those grey eyes, the way they had softened when they met hers. The following week, Clara was assigned to work in the royal gallery, repairing the decorative draperies near the prince's study. She arrived early, her needle case tucked beneath her arm, and began her careful work. The corridor was quiet, except for the ticking of a distant clock and the murmur of voices from the adjoining chamber. One voice was unmistakably his. "The council insists we attend to the engagement arrangements, Your Highness," said an older man. Prince Adrian's reply was tired. "I've not yet agreed." The king grows impatient. "The kingdom needs stability." Adrian sighed. "And what of love, Lord Chancellor? Does the kingdom need that as well?" The older man hesitated. "Love, my prince, is a luxury of poets, not rulers." The door opened suddenly, and the Chancellor departed, nearly colliding with Clara. He gave her a disapproving look before leaving. She tried to retreat, but a calm voice stopped her. "You may come in," the prince said. She hesitated at the doorway, curtsying. "Forgive me, Your Highness. I was only working," he finished with a faint smile. "Then you're the only honest soul in this wing today. Please continue." She entered quietly and took her place by the window, mending the torn velvet with trembling fingers. He returned to his desk, papers spread before him, though she sensed his attention drifted toward her now and then. After a long silence, he spoke again. "What is your name?" "Clara Vale, Your Highness." "Vale?" He repeated it slowly, as if tasting the sound. "I once knew that name. There was a noble family by that title long ago." She stiffened slightly. "Long ago, yes, we are not noble anymore." "Still," he said gently, "the name suits you." Her throat tightened. "It's only a name now." "No," he murmured, looking at her directly. "It's a story." Her eyes met his then, for one unguarded heartbeat, and something passed between them, silent but undeniable. A knock shattered the moment. A servant entered, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, Lady Ashton requests your company." Adrian's expression cooled. "Tell her I'm occupied." The servant hesitated, then withdrew. When the door closed, the prince looked at Clara again. "Sometimes," he said softly, "I envy those who can choose their own company." Clara forced a faint smile. "Even a prince must sew the seams of duty, Your Highness." He laughed quietly, a low, warm sound that made her heart twist. "A fair point, Miss Vale." When she left that afternoon, The corridors outside were glowing with the light of sunset. Servants hurried past. Courtiers whispered in corners, but Clara walked in a daze. It was madness to feel what she was feeling. He was a prince, bound by the weight of lineage and law. She was a seamstress with nothing left but a name and a memory of a ring, and yet as she stepped into the fading light, she could not stop the thought that came unbidden. Perhaps fate had not yet finished with her story, because she had not noticed that the prince watched her go, his hand brushing the small silver box on his desk, the one containing a sapphire ring he had purchased months ago from a village baker, simply because something about it had felt too personal to sell. Chapter 3. The Masked Ball and the Forgotten Past. The first day of spring arrived with the sound of bells ringing through Alderhall's marble corridors. Every room in the palace shimmered with preparation, chandeliers polished to brilliance, musicians tuning harps and violins, cooks tasting sauces, and confections fit for kings. It was the evening of the Spring Masquerade Ball, the grandest event of the royal season, when nobility came masked, alliances were whispered under waltzes, and secrets hid behind silk and lace. For Clara Vale, it was a night that existed only in fairy tales until now. Mistress Danver had chosen her and 3 others to assist in dressing the ladies attending the ball. It was a rare honor, but also a test. If her work impressed the nobles, her career could change forever. If she made one mistake, she could lose everything. Clara stood before the mirror in the seamstress's hall, smoothing her plain gown, the same she'd worn for months, though tonight she had added a small ribbon of deep blue at her throat. Her hair was neatly coiled, her hands trembling only slightly as she gathered her sewing kit. "Ready?" asked her friend Elsie, a cheerful blonde girl with quick fingers and quicker words. "As I'll ever be," Clara murmured. "Then come on," Elsie grinned. "Let's see what royalty smells like up close." The ballroom that evening was a living dream. Gold light poured from the chandeliers like molten sunlight. Masks glittered, fans fluttered, jewels sparkled at throats and wrists. The air was thick with perfume and laughter, and the musicians' waltz wrapped it all in a rhythm that seemed to carry the night forward like a tide. Clara worked quietly at the edges, tending to a tear in a lady's gown, adjusting a ribbon, fixing a hem. She told herself not to look for him, not to even think of him, yet her eyes betrayed her. Prince Adrian was impossible to miss. He stood at the far end of the hall, dressed in black and silver, a simple mask of dark velvet concealing half his face. Even among the glittering nobles, he seemed set apart, not for his title, but for the way he carried himself, calm and distant, as if the revelry around him were only an echo. Beside him stood Lady Alara Ashton, radiant in crimson silk and diamonds. Her beauty was sharp, deliberate, a weapon meant to win a crown. She leaned toward him with a smile too practiced to be tender. Clara looked away, forcing herself to focus on her stitching. "Don't prick your finger staring at the prince," Elsie whispered teasingly as she passed. "I wasn't staring," Clara lied. Elsie smirked. "You blush like a sunset, you know that?" Before Clara could retort, a sharp voice cut through the music. "You there, seamstress?" Clara turned. Lady Ashton herself was beckoning her forward. "My hem has come loose," the lady said coolly. "Do see to it. His Highness cannot be seen with a companion whose gown unravels, can he?" Clara curtsied. "Of course, my lady." As she knelt to fix the hem, she could feel the prince's presence. close enough that she could sense the faint scent of cedar and rain that clung to him. Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked. Lady Ashton laughed lightly. "You have such steady hands, girl. Perhaps that's why Mistress Danver sent you. I hear she saves her finest workers for the most delicate tasks." "I'm honored, my lady," Clara said softly, knotting the last thread. When she rose, she dared a single glance upward and met Adrian's eyes. Even behind the mask, she could see the flicker of recognition. His gaze softened, his lips parting as if to speak, but duty or hesitation held him silent. Lady Ashton noticed nothing, too busy admiring herself in the mirror. Clara curtsied once more and slipped away, heart pounding. Later that night, when the great clock struck 10, Mistress Danver dismissed the seamstresses for the evening. "You've done well," she said gruffly. "Go home before someone finds another thread out of place." But Clara lingered. The ball was still alive with music, and curiosity drew her to the upper gallery overlooking the ballroom. From there, unseen among the shadows, she could watch the world she'd never belonged to. Below, the dance floor shimmered with motion, swirling gowns, jeweled masks, spinning lights, and at the center of it all, the prince danced, not with Lady Ashton, as Clara expected, but alone for a moment, bowing to no one. Then unexpectedly, his gaze lifted, straight toward the gallery. Clara froze. Had he seen her? The distance, the darkness, it should have hidden her, and yet somehow she knew he had. She turned to flee and nearly collided with a masked gentleman in the corridor. "Oh," she gasped, stepping back. "Forgive me," said the man, voice muffled behind a dark mask. "I didn't mean to startle you." His tone was polite, but his presence unnerved her. He was tall, richly dressed, and something in his stance suggested arrogance rather than courtesy. "You're not supposed to be up here, are you?" he asked, taking a slow step forward. I was leaving," Clara said quickly. He tilted his head. "You're no court lady. A servant, perhaps?" "I am a seamstress," she said, her chin lifting slightly. "Ah," his smile curved, sharp as a knife. "A commoner. Then I suppose the rules do not concern you?" Before she could reply, another voice cut through the hall, firm, low, and unmistakably commanding. "They concern everyone, Lord Everett." The masked noble stiffened and turned. Prince Adrian stood a few paces away, still masked, though his bearing was unmistakable. "Your Highness," Everett muttered, bowing. "Return to the ballroom," Adrian said quietly. "Now." The man hesitated, shot Clara a final sneer, then withdrew. Clara stood frozen, her heart still racing. The prince turned toward her, his voice gentler. "Are you all right?" "Yes, Your Highness," she whispered. "He only startled me." Adrian studied her face, then extended a hand. "You shouldn't walk alone in these corridors. May I escort you back?" She hesitated. "I shouldn't, please," he said simply, "for my peace of mind." She took his hand. The touch was warm, startlingly so, and for a moment neither spoke as they walked through the candlelit corridor. The muffled music below seemed far away, as if they were walking through another world entirely. At last he said, "You shouldn't have to hide in shadows to see what others take for granted." She glanced at him. "It's safer in the shadows, Your Highness. No one expects anything of you there." He smiled faintly. "And yet, sometimes that's where the truest hearts live." She looked down, her pulse quickening. "You speak kindly, my prince, but you know as well as I do, our worlds do not touch." "Don't they?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, They reached a small balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. The night air was cool, the scent of roses drifting through the open doors. Adrian stopped, releasing her hand reluctantly. "I shouldn't keep you," he said, though his tone betrayed a hint of regret. "You've done more than your share tonight," she curtsied. "Good night, Your Highness." He didn't move. "Clara," he said softly, and she froze at the sound of her name. "You asked me once what blue reminded me of?" She looked up. "Yes." He reached into his coat and drew out a small box, silver, engraved with the royal crest. He opened it. Inside lay a sapphire ring. Clara's breath caught, her vision blurred as the light caught the stone, the same rich, oceanic blue she had not seen since that winter day years ago. "I bought it months ago," Adrian said quietly, "from a baker in the lower markets. He said it had been traded for bread." Her voice trembled. "It was my mother's." "I thought so," he murmured. "I didn't know why. But when I saw it, I couldn't let it be sold again. It felt wrong." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "She sold it to save us. I never thought I'd see it again." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, then closed the box and placed it gently in her hands. "Then it has found its way home." She stared at him, overwhelmed. "Why would you give it back?" He smiled faintly. "Because some things should never be bought, only returned." For a moment neither spoke. The night seemed to hold its breath, the moonlight silvering their faces, the distant music swelling like a heartbeat. Clara wanted to speak, to thank him, to say anything, but words failed her. The prince stepped closer, his voice low. "I do not know what fate means to you, Miss Vale," he said, "but I believe it's not done with us yet." And then, before she could reply, a call echoed from the ballroom. "Your Highness, Lady Ashton awaits." And the spell broke. Adrian stepped back, his expression composed once more. "Keep it," he said quietly, "for tonight at least." He turned and descended the stairs, leaving her standing alone beneath the moonlight, the sapphire ring gleaming in her trembling hands, as if it had been waiting all along to return to her. Chapter 4. A Promise in Shadows. The morning after the masquerade dawned pale and quiet, yet nothing felt ordinary to Clara. The sapphire ring sat on her small wooden table, catching the first light of day. It seemed almost alive, as if the memory of the night before still glowed within it. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the prince, beneath the mask, the warmth of his voice, the look in his eyes when he placed the ring in her hand. And yet, as morning light replaced moonlight, reality crept back in. He was a prince, she was a seamstress, and fairy tales, as her mother used to say, were written for books, not for bread. Still, she couldn't bring herself to return the ring to the palace steward. Something inside her whispered that giving it back would mean erasing the one piece of kindness the world had ever shown her. She tucked it away safely in a ribboned pouch and went to work. The palace that day buzzed with the echoes of the ball. Maids whispered in corridors, courtiers laughed softly over their tea, musicians packed their instruments and carried stories home. But beneath the glittering surface, Clara felt a shift. Something unseen, like the first tremor before a storm. When she entered the sewing hall, Elsie met her with wide eyes. "Clara, they're saying the prince danced with a mystery lady last night." Clara forced a smile. "There were many mystery ladies, Elsie. It was a masquerade." "Yes, but this one wasn't on the guest list," Elsie insisted. "The guards saw him leading her toward the North Gallery." Clara's pulse faltered. And what of it? Elsie grinned. They say she vanished, just disappeared, like Cinderella. Clara managed a small laugh, though her hands trembled as she began to cut fabric. Stories grow taller with each telling. Yes, said Mistress Danver sharply as she swept past. And some stories are best not told at all. Clara froze. The older woman's gaze lingered on her, heavy with something that felt like warning. Keep your head down, Vale. The higher you look, the faster you'll fall. For the next week, Clara worked in near silence, avoiding the upper corridors and any glimpse of the prince. But fate, as ever, had its own design. One afternoon, she was summoned by the royal steward. The prince requests your presence in the West Library, he said. Bring your sewing kit. Clara's breath caught. The prince himself? Yes. Something about repairing a torn coat. Hurry! Her heart raced as she made her way through the palace's winding halls, past tapestries, marble statues, and sunlight spilling through stained glass. The library was vast and quiet, lined with shelves that reached the vaulted ceiling. Prince Adrian stood near the window, dressed simply, a book in his hand. When he turned and saw her, his face softened. Miss Vale? Your Highness, she said, curtsying. You sent for me? He smiled faintly. If I tell the steward I need a coat mended, they leave me alone for half an hour. She blinked. So there is no coat? None, he admitted, closing the book. Only a desire for conversation. Clara hesitated. That's dangerous talk, Your Highness. Then perhaps I've grown reckless, he said lightly. After all, life is rather dull without a little risk. She tried to steady her voice. If someone saw us, they'd assume I'm dictating a letter or fitting a cuff. He interrupted gently. Please, sit. Reluctantly, she obeyed. He took the chair across from her, watching her with quiet intensity. The sunlight fell across his face, softening the sharpness of his royal bearing. I've been thinking about your ring, he said. It suits you far better than the velvet box it sat in. She looked down. I meant to return it. Don't, he said quickly. It belongs with you. Always did. Her throat tightened. It was my mother's dowry. My father gave it to her on their wedding day. When she sold it, I thought we had sold the last of our happiness. Adrian's eyes gentled. And yet it returned, as if happiness was not finished with you. She smiled faintly. You speak like a poet. He leaned forward slightly. Would you believe me if I said I have never spoken like this to anyone before? Clara met his gaze, unable to look away. I'd believe you, because I've never listened to anyone like this before. The silence between them deepened, heavy and alive. The world outside the library, the throne, the court, the whispers, felt impossibly far away. Then the door creaked open. Both turned sharply. A court. Attendant stood in the doorway, startled. Forgive me, Your Highness, he stammered. I thought you were alone. Adrian rose calmly. You may go. But as the man bowed and retreated, Clara's pulse thundered. She knew what one rumor could do, one careless word, and her life could unravel faster than any seam. I should go, she whispered. Clara, she curtsied, eyes downcast. Thank you, Your Highness, for returning what was lost. Before he could stop her, she fled down the corridor, her heart breaking with every step. By the next morning, the palace was humming with gossip. The prince and a seamstress, the library, the mysterious ring. No one said her name outright, but she could feel their eyes. Servants, sidelong glances, noble women's knowing smirks. Even Mistress Danver avoided her gaze. The final blow came during supper, when Elsie sat beside her, face pale. "Clara, the royal advisor asked about you." Clara set down her spoon. "About me? He asked Mistress Danver whether you've ever spoken to the prince alone." Danver said she didn't know, but she looked frightened. Clara's stomach turned to ice. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. When the clock struck midnight, she rose, unable to bear the silence, and stepped outside to the servants' courtyard. The air was cool, scented with lavender and rain. She wandered to the stone fountain, her reflection rippling in the water. For a moment she wished she were someone else. A duchess, a scholar, anyone with the right to love him without fear. Then she heard footsteps. "I thought I might find you here," Adrian's voice said softly behind her. She turned, startled. "Your Highness, you shouldn't." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "But if the world insists on punishing me for speaking to you, then let it." Her eyes filled. "They're already whispering." "Let them whisper," he said fiercely. "I have lived my whole life according to duty and expectation. You're the first thing I've wanted simply for myself." Her breath caught. "And what happens when the king finds out? When they demand your betrothal to Lady Ashton?" He shook his head. "I will not marry her. You may not have a choice," she said, voice breaking. "You're the crown prince." He took her hands in his. "And yet, at this moment, I am only a man asking a woman to trust him." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "If I trust you, I lose everything." He brushed a tear away with his thumb. "Then let me lose it with you." For a heartbeat the world stilled. The night air shimmered with unsaid words. And somewhere far off, the palace clock chimed once, twice. Then he kissed her. It was not the kind of kiss meant to claim or possess, but one born of quiet desperation, of two souls who knew that time was not on their side. His hands cradled her face. Hers trembled against his chest, and for that moment nothing else existed but warmth, breath, and the dizzying ache of being seen. When they parted, the tears on her cheeks were joined by his. "Promise me," he said hoarsely, "whatever happens, hold on to the ring. It will protect you." She nodded, unable to speak, and then, from the shadows at the edge of the courtyard, a flicker of movement, the sound of a cloak rustling. Clara turned sharply but saw no one, yet she felt it. Someone had been watching. By dawn, the whispers had grown into something darker. The royal advisor, Lord Holden, summoned her. "You were seen in the gardens last night," he said coldly. "After curfew with His Highness." Clara's mouth went dry. "I was bringing back his repaired coat." "Do not lie," he said sharply. "You think you can toy with him? You think a seamstress can tempt the future king?" "I would never." "Enough," Holden hissed. "His Majesty will hear of this. You will pack your things and leave the palace by nightfall." Her vision blurred. "Please, be grateful we do not arrest you," he said. "Your name will be struck from the servants' rolls. You will never work in this city again." He turned away, leaving her trembling and hollow. That evening, Clara stood outside the servants' gate, her small bag in hand, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She looked up once at the palace windows, high, golden, unreachable, and wondered if he knew. She almost didn't notice the folded note slipped beneath her shawl until she stepped onto the road. Unfolding it with shaking fingers, she read the words written in a hand she knew too well. Meet me at the old chapel in the western woods at midnight. Trust no one. Her heart pounded. The old chapel, the place where, according to the maid's tales, the royal family once prayed before coronations. Abandoned now, it lay beyond the city walls. She clutched the note, the ring heavy around her neck, and whispered to the wind, then let fate finish what it started. And as the sun set behind Alder Hall, Clara walked into the deepening shadows toward a promise whispered under the stars, and a destiny that would demand everything she had left. Chapter 5. The Price of a Name. The night was colder than she remembered. Mist coiled between the trees like pale fingers, and the forest seemed to breathe with her. Every sound louder, every heartbeat sharper. The moon was a sliver of silver through the branches as Clara followed the worn path to the old chapel. It had once been beautiful, she could tell, even through the ivy strangling its stones and the cracked archway that yawned like a wound. Inside, the air smelled of dust and time. Faded murals of angels watched from the ceiling, their faces chipped and sorrowful. She waited by the altar, her candle flickering in the draught. Minutes passed. Then from the doorway came the sound of boots on stone. Clara! She turned, and there he was, Prince Adrian, cloak drawn, face pale in the moonlight. For the first time since she had met him, he looked less like a prince and more like a man being hunted. You came, he breathed, relief washing over his features. You told me to trust you, she said softly. So I did. He stepped closer, the candlelight catching on his eyes. They're watching us, Clara. Lord Halden has men following me. He suspects everything. I was dismissed, she said, her voice breaking. He said I'd never work again. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then I'll fix it. You can't, she whispered. You're the crown prince. They'll destroy you before they let you throw everything away for you. His voice rose, then softened, trembling. Let them try. She shook her head, tears falling freely now. You don't understand what they can do. They've already taken everything from me once. Adrian frowned. What do you mean? She hesitated, then reached into her shawl and drew out a folded letter. Old, worn, its edges frayed. My mother left this. She told me to burn it if we were ever caught begging again. I never read it until last night. He took it gently, glancing at her in question. It's addressed to the Duchess of Valemont, she said quietly. Do you know the name? Adrian's expression changed. Valemont. My mother spoke of it. The duchy was dissolved years ago after a scandal. The Duke was accused of treason and executed. Clara nodded. My mother never spoke of her family. She only said she once lived among people who wore silk instead of hunger. Her eyes filled. That ring, it wasn't just my mother's wedding band. It was the family crest of Valemont. Adrian stared at her, realization dawning. Clara, you're not just a seamstress. She gave a broken laugh. Then what am I? A ghost of a ruined name? He unfolded the letter and read it under the flickering light. As his eyes scanned the page, his expression turned to shock. What does it say? She asked. He looked up slowly. It says, your mother was the Duke of Valemont's daughter, and that she fled the court when your father, a common soldier, saved her during the purge. The crown seized everything. She took one ring and her father's blessing and swore never to reveal your lineage. Clara felt the ground sway beneath her. So she was noble? More than noble, Adrian said. She was the rightful heir to Valemont. She sank to her knees, overcome. All these years, we starved beside what once was ours. Adrian knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he took hers. Then it wasn't charity when I gave you that ring back, he said softly. It was restoration, fate's way of returning what was stolen. She met his gaze, and for the first time she believed it might be true. But outside the chapel walls, another figure watched through the darkness. Lord Halden stood at a distance, a torch flickering in his hand, eyes narrowing as he saw the prince kneeling before the girl. He turned to the guards behind him. Now, he whispered. Inside, Adrian drew her into his arms. Clara, listen to me. I've already sent word to my mother. The Queen will understand. Once she knows who you are, we can... The chapel doors burst open. Your Highness! Guards flooded in, their armor clanging, their torches blazing against the ancient walls. Lord Halden stepped forward, his voice cold as steel. By order of His Majesty, you are both to return to the palace at once. Adrian rose, fury in his eyes. You overstep your bounds, Halden. I serve the crown, your Highness, Halden said smoothly, even when the crown forgets its duty. Two guards seized Clara's arms. She struggled. Let me go. Adrian moved toward them, but Halden raised a hand. One more step, and she'll be charged with sedition. On what grounds? Adrian demanded. On the grounds that she has deceived the royal family, Halden said coldly. That she has used a false name, concealed her lineage, and conspired to seduce the heir to the throne. That's a lie, Clara cried. I didn't even know. Take her, Halden ordered. Adrian lunged forward, grabbing Clara's hand as the guards dragged her away. I'll find you, he shouted. Do you hear me, Clara? I'll bring you back. She was crying, fighting, reaching for him until the chapel doors slammed between them, with a thunderous echo that broke her heart. They took her to the old fortress prison by the river, a place where traitors were forgotten. The cell was damp, the stone floor biting cold beneath her feet. For days, no one came, no food, no warmth, only silence and the echo of dripping water. She held the ring in her palm and whispered his name like a prayer. Then, on the third night, the door creaked open. A woman stepped inside, cloaked and veiled. Clara rose weakly. Please, she whispered, tell me what's happened. The woman drew back her hood, and Clara gasped. It was the Queen. Your Majesty, Clara breathed, dropping to her knees. The Queen's face was lined with sorrow. Rise, child. I owe you more than an apology. Clara stood shakily. You know me? The Queen nodded. I knew your mother when she fled the palace. I helped her escape. I thought she had gone across the sea. I did not know she bore a child. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She never spoke of this. The Queen reached out and touched her cheek gently. You have her eyes and her courage. Then why am I here? Clara whispered. Why won't they let me see him? Because Lord Halden holds the king's ear, the Queen said bitterly. He convinced His Majesty that you threaten the throne. He fears you could claim Valemont and rally the old families. I don't want a crown, Clara said, her voice trembling. I only want... Adrian, the Queen finished softly. I know. She took Clara's hand and pressed something into it. A small golden seal stamped with the royal crest. This will open the west gate of the palace. At dawn tomorrow, my carriage will pass the bridge. Be there. Clara's breath caught. You're helping me escape? The queen smiled sadly. I'm helping my son find his heart again. Before Clara could speak, the queen turned to leave. Be brave, she said quietly. Your story isn't over yet. That night, Clara barely slept. She watched the moon sink beyond the bars, the golden seal heavy in her palm. As dawn began to pale the sky, she slipped through the shadows of the prison courtyard, heart pounding. The guards at the west gate slept under their cloaks. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked and the gate creaked open. She ran across the frozen grass, through the mist rising from the river toward the bridge, and there, just as the queen had promised, a carriage waited. But before she could reach it, a hand seized her wrist. Well, Lord Holden said softly, emerging from the fog. How touching. The queen's pet tries to flee. She tried to pull away. Let me go. He tightened his grip. You're a fool if you think I'd let the prince destroy everything for you. His other hand drew a blade, slender, glinting in the pale light. History forgets so easily. Another nameless girl lost to the river. How tragic. Clara's breath came fast. Her heart thundered. Then, in one desperate motion, she twisted free and struck him with the seal. He staggered back, cursing. She ran, her skirts tearing on the stones, his footsteps thundering behind her. Then a shout, horses, a voice she knew. Clara! Adrian's voice. The prince rode out of the mist with half a dozen guards at his back. Holden froze. Too late. Adrian dismounted, sword drawn, eyes blazing. Step away from her, he commanded. Holden sneered. You'd raise steel against your father's counselor? Adrian's voice was steady as he raised his blade. For her, I'd raise it against the world. They clashed. Steel against steel, sparks flying. The fight was brief but brutal. Holden was cunning, but Adrian fought with a fury born of love and desperation. With one swift strike, he disarmed him, sending the blade spinning into the river. Holden fell to his knees. You'll regret this, he spat. Not today, Adrian said coldly. Guards, take him. The queen will decide his fate. As they dragged Holden away, Clara fell to her knees, trembling. Adrian turned to her, his sword falling to the ground, his hands cupping her face. You're safe now, he whispered, voice breaking. You're safe. She clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder as dawn broke over the misted river, and the first light of morning touched the sapphire ring on her hand, now bright and clear as hope itself. Chapter 6. The Fire and the Crown. The kingdom awoke to whispers of scandal and rebellion. By dawn, news of Lord Holden's arrest had spread like wildfire through Alderhall. The royal court seethed. Some whispered that the prince had turned traitor for a servant girl. Others claimed the seamstress had bewitched him with forbidden charms. Only one thing was certain: the peace that had once wrapped the palace in golden silk was unraveling thread by thread. Adrian stood before the throne, his boots still muddy from the riverbank, his eyes dark with exhaustion. The king sat rigid, the weight of his crown casting deep shadows over his face. The queen stood beside him, silent, unreadable. You bring disgrace upon this house, the king thundered. You challenge my counsel, assault my advisor, and defy your own father. For her, she is innocent, Adrian said steadily. Holden sought to destroy her to protect his own lies. I won't let her pay for his crimes. You think with your heart, not your head, the king snapped. And hearts, my son, have ruined empires. The queen's hand trembled slightly on the armrest. Perhaps, Majesty, she said quietly, but they've built them too. The king turned to her sharply. "Not now." Adrian stepped forward, his voice steady. "Father, I know what you fear. You think she threatens the crown, but she doesn't. She restores it. Clara Vale is the last of Valemont, a house loyal to ours before corruption tore it apart. Her name was stolen. I only mean to give it back." The king rose. "And what then? Shall I watch the people cheer a prince who weds a seamstress and calls it justice? No, you will end this. You will marry Lady Ashton as decreed." Adrian's jaw clenched. "I will not." "Then you are no longer my heir," the king said, voice cold as winter. The silence that followed was shattering. The queen gasped softly, "Henry," but the king turned away. "Take him to his chambers. He is confined until further notice." Adrian looked once at his mother, then at the empty throne that would no longer be his. "You may strip me of the crown," he said quietly, "but not of what makes me worthy of it." Then he turned and walked away as the guards closed in. Clara remained in the queen's quarters under guard, unaware of the storm raging beyond the palace walls. She stood by the window, watching smoke rise from the city below, the people rioting, shouting her name. The prince's love, they called her, the Valemont heir. Justice for the seamstress. Her heart ached with fear. She had never sought attention, never wanted to become a symbol. Yet here she was, the spark in a fire she never meant to ignite. The queen entered quietly, her face pale. "You've set history in motion, my dear." "I didn't mean to," Clara whispered. "I only wanted to survive." "Then survive you must," said the queen, placing a hand on her shoulder. "The king has declared martial law. The nobles are gathering their soldiers. They'll blame you for this unrest." "Where is Adrian?" The queen hesitated. "Confined. They mean to send him away to the northern frontier by dawn." Clara's breath caught. "No, they can't. Unless someone stops them," the queen said softly. "And that someone is you." Clara turned to her, trembling. "Me? You must reach him before the convoy departs. Once he's beyond the city walls, he'll be lost to you and to the throne. If there's any truth in your love, child, it's time to prove it." Clara stared at her, the weight of the queen's words sinking deep. "How?" The queen smiled faintly, the firelight flickering in her eyes. "You were a seamstress, were you not? Slip through the cracks, as you always have. The crown forgets that empires fall not by swords, but by those who know where to cut the thread." By midnight, the palace burned with tension. Guards patrolled every corridor. The courtyard was alive with the sound of horses and shouts. Wrapped in a servant's cloak, Clara moved like a shadow. Her hands still remembered the rhythm of sewing, quick, precise, invisible. She used that same skill now, untying knots, loosening hinges, slipping keys into locks. Every heartbeat was a drum of defiance. When she reached the north hall, she saw him. Adrian stood at the window of his locked chamber, shoulders squared, his figure half lit by torchlight. His head turned at the sound of her whisper. "Adrian!" He froze. "Clara?" In an instant she was inside, the lock undone, the door creaking softly. He caught her in his arms before she could speak. "I thought I'd lost you," he breathed. "You almost did," she said, her voice shaking. "They're sending you away." He nodded grimly. "I know. My father means to bury me where I can't be heard. Then we leave together." He smiled sadly. "The gates are sealed, the roads patrolled. There's no escape." She pulled the queen's seal from her pocket, the same golden crest she had used to free herself. "There is one." For a moment he stared at it, then at her. "My mother," she said, to trust her. "And I do." He took her hand. "Then so do I." They slipped through the West Passage, cloaked in the smoke of chaos. The city below had erupted, not in rebellion, but in confusion. The nobles' guards clashed with the people. Flames licked the edge of the market square, and bells tolled through the night. But as they reached the outer courtyard, the sound that tore through the air was not of battle, it was of explosion. The stables burst into fire, horses screamed, men shouted orders. A second blast shook the ground. "What's happening?" Clara cried. "Sabotage!" Adrian shouted, pulling her behind a stone arch. "Haldan's loyalists, they mean to kill the king." Clara's eyes widened. "Then we must warn him." He hesitated. "If I go back, I'll be arrested again." She grasped his arm fiercely. "If you don't, your father will die, and they'll crown a traitor in his place." Her words hit him like thunder. He looked toward the burning palace, then back at her. "Then we go together," he said. Inside the palace, chaos reigned. Smoke poured through the corridors as guards fought masked men, Haldan's remnants, dressed as servants, blades hidden in cloaks. The air was thick with the scent of ash and steel. Adrian drew his sword, cutting through the fray, Clara close behind. Every strike echoed his defiance, every step his redemption. They reached the throne room and froze. The king stood cornered by two assassins. One raised his blade, and before Adrian could reach him, Clara hurled herself forward, seizing a fallen guard's sword. She deflected the strike with a cry, steel ringing against steel. "Run!" Adrian shouted. "I won't!" she screamed, parrying another blow. The assassin lunged again, and Adrian's sword flashed, ending it. The other fled, smoke swallowing him whole. The king, pale and shaken, stared at them both. "You saved me." Adrian lowered his sword. "She did." Clara dropped to her knees, trembling, blood on her sleeve. "Your Majesty, please. I never meant for any of this." The king stepped forward slowly, the fire's reflection dancing in his eyes. "You fought for me. When others fled, I fought for him," she whispered. He looked at his son, the heir who had defied him, and the woman who had risked everything for love, and something within him, pride, fear, or perhaps the ghost of his own youth, broke. "You remind me of your mother," he said quietly to Adrian. "She too had a fire that would not yield." Then he turned to Clara. "Rise, Lady Valemont," Clara gasped. "Your Majesty." "Rise," he repeated. "You've earned your name back, and my respect." She rose slowly, the sapphire ring glinting like a promise reborn. When the flames died, the city stilled. The people whispered of a night when love saved a kingdom, and truth burned brighter than crowns. The queen found them in the courtyard, soot-streaked and weary, watching the sunrise over the river. She smiled, the quiet smile of a mother who had seen fate bend to mercy. "Your father has agreed," she said softly. "He'll announce it at the coronation." Clara frowned. "Announce what?" Adrian took her hand, his eyes shining in the pale gold light. "That Valemont will be restored, and that its new duchess will stand beside the prince who once gave her back her mother's ring." Clara's breath caught. "Adrian." He knelt, drawing the sapphire from its chain, the gem glimmering between them. "You once said your mother sold this ring for bread, he said quietly. Then let it now stand for something greater. He slid it onto her finger, for love that cannot be bought, nor silenced, nor undone. Tears streamed down her face as he rose and kissed her, the kiss that sealed not only their hearts, but a kingdom's rebirth. Chapter 7. The ring returned. The prince restores the ring, now engraved with his name, sealing not only a promise, but a destiny. Dawn broke over Alstera like a sigh after a night of sorrow. The city still smoldered, wisps of smoke curling from rooftops, banners torn and burned, the air heavy with the scent of ash and rain, but the bells of the cathedral tolled slow and steady, announcing that the kingdom yet lived. Inside the palace, the marble floors bore the footprints of chaos. Blood had dried in places where guards had fallen. Petals from trampled bouquets still clung to the banisters from the ball that had ended in fire. And among all this ruin, a woman with soot-streaked cheeks and torn gown stood at the great window, watching the dawn. Elara. Her hair was unbound, curling wildly in the morning light. Her hands trembled, not from fear now, but from disbelief that she was still standing, that he was still alive. The door opened softly behind her. Elara, came a voice she had thought lost in the flames. She turned, and there he was, Prince Alden, his uniform singed, one sleeve torn, a bandage at his temple. But his eyes, those storm-blue eyes, were steady, alive. For a moment neither moved. Then she rushed toward him, and he caught her, drawing her into his arms with a force that spoke of all the hours he'd spent searching the ruins for her. "You're here," she breathed, her voice cracking. I told you I would always find you," he whispered, holding her tighter. "Not fire, nor crown, nor kingdom will keep me from you." They stayed that way for a long moment, the world beyond the window slowly coming alive again. Then Alden drew back slightly, his expression softening. "There's something I must return," he said quietly. He reached into his coat pocket. For an instant Elara's breath caught, and then she saw it. The ring, her mother's ring. The sapphire gleamed faintly despite the grime of war and fire. It had been polished, restored, and something new gleamed upon the inside of the band. Alden held it out to her on his open palm. "When I first saw this ring," he said, his voice low, "I thought it was just a relic of the past. I didn't know it belonged to the woman who would become my heart." He met her gaze. "It fed your family once, Elara. It bought survival. Now I return it to promise more than life, to promise a future." She looked down. Inside the gold band, engraved with delicate precision, were the words, "Alden of Alstera, her choice, her crown." Elara's lips parted. You carved your name so that no matter where you go or what happens to this kingdom," he said softly, "you'll never again have to sell it to survive, because my name will always bring you home." Her eyes filled with tears that trembled like morning dew. "Alden, I can't. I'm not." He pressed a finger gently to her lips. "You are everything this crown was meant to protect." Later that day, the court gathered, not in the grand ballroom, but in the courtyard where the people could see. The kingdom, battered and burned, needed something to believe in. They saw their prince stand before them, the seamstress by his side. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat, but Alden's voice rose above it all. "This kingdom was nearly lost to greed and fire," he said. the crown heavy in his hand. But it will rise again, not through bloodlines, but through the courage of those who kept faith when all was ashes. This woman is one of them. She is Ulstera's heart and mine. He turned to her then, before the people, before heaven. Alara Marine, daughter of love and sacrifice, will you stand beside me, not as a subject, but as my equal, my wife, my queen? The crowd fell silent. Only the wind moved, carrying the scent of rain, of renewal. Alara looked up at him, her heart too full for words. She reached for the ring, the same one her mother had traded for bread, and slid it onto her finger, where it caught the light of dawn. Then she whispered, yes. Cheers broke out. Not polite applause, but the roar of a people starved for hope. Bells rang, doves took flight, and for the first time in months, the sun burned through the clouds. Alden turned to her once more, taking her hand. Your mother's ring, he said, his voice barely audible beneath the cheers, has returned home at last. Alara smiled through her tears. No, she murmured, it's found a new one. That evening, when the palace had quieted, Alara stood on the balcony overlooking the river. The stars were out, reflected in the black glass of the water. Alden joined her, his arm slipping around her shoulders. Do you think she knows? He asked softly. Your mother, that her sacrifice led you here? Alara smiled faintly. She always said love finds its way back, even when the world burns. Alden kissed her hair. Then so it has. They stood there together, the prince and the seamstress, the crown and the heart, as the wind carried the scent of spring and the river murmured below, eternal and new all at once. And on her finger the sapphire gleamed, once sold for bread, now returned with his name, binding not just two souls, but the story of a kingdom reborn.